Welcome to the deep dive. Today, you've brought us a really compelling stack of material. We're going to be exploring the major challenges facing the pro-life movement in 2023.
That's right. And it's largely drawn from a pretty significant interview with Michael Voris and Abby Johnson, looking at the landscape right after the Dobbs decision.
So our mission here is to really unpack the core crises that these sources identify. And we're talking about three big ones.
Yep. First, there's the huge logistical shift to chemical abortion. Then the cultural indifference of the public.
And finally, a really sharp critique of what they see as leadership failure, specifically within the Catholic Church hierarchy.
It's a lot to get through.
It is. And before we dive into these really complex issues, we should probably pause for a second. If you're looking for a resource that offers a balanced perspective on these things, something that's neither modernist nor ultra-traditionalist for Catholics facing these kinds of challenges to their faith, we'd suggest visiting www.epistles.online.
Right. Epistles is really focused on confronting things like clericalism, liberalism, modernism, all the things the sources claim are fueling this crisis of faith. It's a good place to find the full context.
Okay, so let's get into it. The first major threat identified in the sources, chemical abortion. Abby Johnson calls it the, quote, biggest single threat now. What makes it such a game changer?
Well, it's the sheer availability. The fight, it completely moved from the clinic door to the mailbox almost overnight.
The mailbox.
Yeah. Johnson claims you can go online to over 70 websites, use fake names, fake dates of birth, whatever you want, and just have the pill sent anywhere in the U.S.
So that's a fundamental change to the entire battlefield. If there's minimal verification, you've basically removed the need for a physical location.
You've got it. The sources argue it effectively turns, and this is their phrase, every woman's home into an abortion clinic.
Wow.
And this isn't just an idea. The numbers show it. This was a stated goal of Planned Parenthoods from way back in 2009.
And they've succeeded.
Completely. Official numbers put medication abortions at around 54%, but the experts we looked at think it's actually much higher, probably closer to 60, maybe 65%.
A rapid takeover. But the sources suggest the reason for this pivot wasn't just about, making it easier for women. There was a practical crisis for the providers themselves.
Yes, that's the key. It boils down to a very simple fact. Chemical abortion requires, quote, no doctor.
So it solves a personnel shortage.
A massive one. The sources detail how the old guard of well-known abortion providers, they need people like Leroy Carhart, Warren Hearn, they're all aging out, they're in their 80s, some are dying, and there just isn't a new generation of doctors lining up to replace them.
The pill fills that gap.
The pill makes the service doctor agnostic. Exactly.
They found a way around the physician shortage. Okay, this leads to a much darker part of the source material, the radical extremes that providers are willing to explore with this. Can you get into the findings on misoprostol-only procedures?
Right. This is where it gets really alarming. The sources cite this Canadian study from 2008. In it, doctors were giving women 800 micrograms of misoprostol every 1 to 2 hours vaginally.
And how far along were these pregnancies?
24 weeks. That's 6 months.
6 months. That's way past the standard protocols for medication abortion. What were the outcomes?
Well, see, misoprostol just induces contractions. It doesn't actually terminate the life of the child in the womb.
Absolutely.
So the outcome was that these women were delivering fully formed, potentially born alive babies, often in places like hotel rooms, completely unsupervised.
My gosh, what were they told to do?
They were instructed to use a Go kit. It had things like gauze, scissors, and a red biohazard bag, and they were told to put the live baby in the bag and let it suffocate.
That's horrific. And the source's concern is that this is where providers in the U.S. want to go.
That's the fear, that they will continue to push to change the regulations in the FDA's RAMs and regs to extend medication abortion way beyond the current 10 or 12-week limit.
And this leads to a pretty major critique of the pro-life movement's response, right? The language gets very provocative here.
Extremely. The source compares the daily number of abortions, which they estimate at 2,400, to the 2,500 people who died on 9/11. They say there is a Twin Towers event happening every single day.
And from that, they argue the situation is, what, Civil War material?
Yes, that it needs civil unrest to match the severity of the crisis.
That is some very high-stakes rhetoric. Is the point just to shock people? Or is there a strategic critique behind it?
It's a critique of what they see as inconsistency. The source claims that the pro-life movement, even after Roe fell, doesn't actually see the unborn child equal to a child out of the womb.
That's a very harsh judgment. Why would they say that? Where's the inconsistency?
The argument is this. If they truly believed in that equality, then in states where abortion is now illegal, like Texas or Tennessee, these should be pushing for abortion to be punished as murder.
But they aren't.
They aren't. And the source claims it's because the movement is more worried about optics, the political backlash, than they are about what they would call true justice.
That sheds a lot of light on the internal debates. But let's zoom out. Why is the average American, seemingly so indifferent to all this, even after a huge decision like Dobbs?
The source gives a cultural explanation. It's about saturation. The estimate is that 1 in 3 women in America has had an abortion, which also means 3 men have been involved.
So it's personal for a huge portion of the population.
Exactly. Society is full of what the source calls walking wounded people. And so indifference becomes a kind of psychological self-protection.
So the anger we see from pro-abortion groups, the source interprets that as something else.
Yeah. They call it hurt disguised as anger. The idea is that it's psychologically much easier to say it wasn't a baby or it was just tissue than it is to confront the idea that I killed my child.
Justification.
Right. And that need for justification is what drives the cultural apathy. It's too painful for millions of people to confront it head on.
So to fight that indifference, what's the proposed strategy?
They look back to the abolitionists during the slavery era. The idea is that the question was never settled until it was abolished. So the strategy has to be to constantly make people uncomfortable, to keep putting it in their face and make the issue unsettled until society has to deal with it.
Okay, we've hit logistics and culture. Let's move to that third crisis, leadership. The source saves its sharpest criticism for the Catholic Church hierarchy. What are the main points here?
There are 3 main failures they identify. First, they say the hierarchy completely misframed the issue. They made it a political issue instead of a human rights issue or, at its core, a sin issue. And because it's political, they're afraid to talk about it, afraid to hand out voter guides showing where candidates stand. They're too timid.
And this political framing is made worse by a strategic mistake.
Absolutely. The source calls the consistent life or seamless garment philosophy a major error.
Can you just quickly explain that for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. It's the idea of lumping abortion in with a whole bunch of other issues. Immigration, the death penalty, climate change, even GMOs. The critique is that this just dilutes the core focus, which they argue must be ending abortion, period.
And beyond strategy, there's a problem with accountability.
A big one. The source points to a total lack of repercussions for priests who are openly pro-choice or who give communion to very public pro-abortion politicians. It creates, they say, deep confusion and lets the sin grow like a cancer.
Okay, and the final, maybe the most intense critique is about what the source calls the elevation of heresy. Why is this so damaging from their perspective?
Because it creates a crisis of confidence in basic truth. The source says that good holy priests are being canceled, while others they consider heretics, they specifically name James Martin, are being elevated, kept close to the Pope, with no consequences.
And the implication of that is?
The implication, according to the source, is that if he's a heretic and nothing is done, then the people above him are also heretics. It suggests the problem goes right to the very top.
We've definitely covered 3 huge, challenging areas today. The logistics of chemical abortion, the cultural indifference, and this really strong critique of church leadership.
Yeah, and I think this deep dive really reveals that the biggest fight for the movement, post-Dobbs, might not even be against pro-abortion groups. It might be an internal one.
How so?
A fight to define what justice actually looks like, and whether the movement is prepared to worry about doing what is right and holy rather than just, worrying about optics.
A really provocative thought to end on. For anyone who wants to do further reading on these challenges and for that Catholic perspective we mentioned that fights clericalism, liberalism, and modernism, remember to check out www.epistles.online.
It's a valuable resource for this stuff.
We hope this gave you a few new insights to take with you. Until the next deep dive, keep learning.